The morning sun broke over the harbor in Norfolk, Virginia. Golden light shimmered on the Navy ships, calm waves lapping against steel hulls. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds sipped his lukewarm coffee, watching a few gulls circle lazily over the pier. He had served 10 honorable years in the Navy, but lately, his heart felt heavier than his uniform. 3 years had passed since his wife, Sarah, died in a car accident while he was deployed overseas. Their little boy, Ethan, was only 5 then. Now 8 years old, Ethan had his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn smile. Every morning, Mark tied his son's shoes, packed his lunch, and dropped him at school before heading to base. His fellow sailors called him Super Dad. He just smiled, but inside, he carried a loneliness too deep to share. That Friday, his unit had a long briefing before deployment. After the meeting, Petty Officer Jim Carter, always the prankster, nudged Mark with a grin. "Hey, Lieutenant, we're tired of seeing you go home alone every night. So, we signed you up for a blind date." The room burst into laughter. Mark blinked. "You did what?" Jim raised his hands in mock surrender. "It's all in good fun, sir. She's a friend of the Admiral's niece or something. You'll thank us later." Mark sighed, rubbing his temple. "I don't have time for this." But that night, when Ethan was asleep, he found the note Jim had slipped into his jacket pocket. A name, Claire Donovan. And a place, Seaside Café, downtown, Saturday 7 p.m. He stared at it for a long time. It had been years since he'd been on any kind of date. Part of him thought about crumpling the paper, but then he remembered Sarah's last letter, written before her final trip, where she'd written, "Promise me you'll keep living. Promise me you'll let love find you again." He exhaled slowly. Maybe one dinner wouldn't hurt. Saturday evening came softly, with the city glowing under the fading amber sky. Mark parked his old navy blue Chevy near the harbor and walked toward the cafe. The air smelled of salt and roasted coffee beans. Boats bobbed gently along the pier. Inside, soft jazz floated through the air. When he saw Claire, he froze. She had auburn hair pulled back loosely, gentle eyes, and a smile that seemed both shy and confident. When she stood to greet him, her presence felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "You must be Mark," she said. "Guilty." He smiled nervously. "And you're the victim of my friend's practical joke." They both laughed, and that laughter melted the awkwardness. They talked for hours about life, travel, and family. She worked as a nurse at a children's hospital, strong, kind, full of quiet humor. When he mentioned Ethan, her eyes softened. "I work with kids like him every day," she said. "They're braver than most adults I know." When the waiter brought dessert, Mark realized something. For the first time in years, he was laughing again. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Outside, the night wind whispered through the harbor lights. As they said goodbye, Claire smiled gently. "I'm glad your friends set you up, even if it was a joke." Mark nodded. Maybe some jokes are meant to be blessings. Weeks turned into months. Mark and Claire began seeing each other often. Coffee before dawn shifts, walks in the city park, weekends with Ethan at the aquarium. She had a calm way of balancing his storms. He, in turn, helped her laugh again after her own broken engagement years ago. But love rarely grows without testing. In March, Mark's unit received sudden deployment orders. 3 months at sea. It was his duty, his calling, but his heart ached. He didn't know how to tell Ethan or Claire. One windy afternoon, they sat near the Chesapeake Bay bridge, watching waves crash below. Ethan threw pebbles into the surf while Mark held Claire's hand. "I have to go," he said quietly. "Orders came in this morning." Her face stilled. "When?" "Next Friday." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the ocean filled the silence. Finally, Claire turned to him. "Then we'll make every day till then count." That night, Ethan asked the question Mark dreaded. "Dad, are you leaving again?" Mark knelt beside him. "Yes, buddy, but I'll be back soon. And Claire promised to visit you while I'm gone." Ethan looked down. "I like her," he whispered. "She makes you smile again." Mark swallowed hard. "Yeah, she does." The week passed too quickly. On the morning of departure, the pier buzzed with families waving flags, children crying, sailors hugging their loved ones. Claire stood beside Ethan, holding his hand, as Mark saluted his commanding officer Admiral Joseph Turner, a stern man known for his heart beneath the uniform. Before boarding, the Admiral called Mark over. "Lieutenant Reynolds," he said, his tone softening, "I heard how your unit set up that little blind date prank." Mark chuckled lightly. "Yes, sir. It turned out better than expected." The Admiral smiled. "Good. Sometimes the Navy gives more than orders. Sometimes it gives second chances." He paused, his voice lower. "My wife passed away years ago. I know that emptiness. Don't waste the gift of love when it comes knocking." Mark felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thank you, sir." As the ship pulled away, Claire waved, chairs glinting under the morning sun. Ethan stood tall beside her, saluting his father. Mark smiled from the deck, trying to memorize their faces, the two people who made him believe in tomorrow again. During deployment, the ocean was both friend and enemy, vast, endless, beautiful, and lonely. Mark wrote letters every week. Claire sent photos of her and Ethan at the park, feeding ducks, visiting the museum, even baking cookies, badly shaped, but full of love. Then one night, a sudden storm struck at sea. Winds roared, waves towered, the ship shuddered under the assault. But through the chaos, Mark led his men calmly, remembering what Claire once told him. Kindness under pressure is courage in disguise. When the storm cleared, the crew was safe. And Mark realized, he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living with purpose again. 3 months later, the base announced the ship's return. The harbor filled with music, banners, and laughter. Helicopters hovered briefly overhead, filming the homecoming for the local news. Families lined the pier, waving flags and holding signs. Claire stood near the front, Ethan on her shoulders. He clutched a sign that read, "Welcome home, Dad, we missed you." When Mark finally stepped off the gangway, his heart nearly burst. Ethan jumped into his arms, giggling and crying at once. Claire stood a few feet away, tears in her eyes. He walked toward her slowly, the crowd fading into a blur. "I told you I'd come back," he said softly. "I never doubted you," she whispered. At that moment, Admiral Turner approached, smiling warmly. He looked at them, the sailor, the woman, and the boy, and placed a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying over the harbor, "sometimes the Navy teaches us discipline and duty. But today, it's teaching us something greater." Mark looked at him, puzzled. The Admiral gestured toward Claire and Ethan. "It's teaching us that love, and kindness, can rebuild even the most broken hearts." He paused, his eyes glistening. "Carry that lesson wherever you serve." The Admiral's words struck something deep inside Mark. Tears he hadn't shed in years filled his eyes. He saluted the Admiral, voice trembling. "Yes, sir, I will." That evening, the three of them walked together along the harbor. Streetlights shimmered on the water like stars scattered in the tide. Ethan ran ahead chasing the sound of a bus passing over the bridge, laughing with pure joy. Claire slipped her hand into Mark's. "You know," she said softly, "if your friends hadn't pulled that prank, we might never have met." Mark smiled. "Then I owe them more than a thank you. Maybe a lifetime." They stood in silence, watching the city lights flicker, and for the first time since Sarah's passing, Mark didn't feel alone. He felt peace. He felt hope. He felt home. Months later, Mark, Claire, and Ethan moved into a small house near the park. The sound of laughter often filled the rooms. Claire brought warmth, Ethan brought light, and Mark brought gratitude. Sometimes, he still visited Sarah's resting place with flowers. He'd kneel quietly, whispering, "I kept my promise. You said love would find me again, and it did." And every year, on the anniversary of his deployment, he visited the base to thank the same crew who once teased him for that blind date joke that changed his life forever. Because sometimes, a random act of kindness, even one born of laughter, becomes the miracle someone's been praying for. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, please take a moment to leave your thoughts in the comments. Your words mean the world to us and they inspire others to believe in kindness and love again. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Quest, where every story reminds us that compassion still lives among us. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change an entire life.